The colony ship Dawn's Promise had traveled through the darkness of space for 200 years. Inside its metal walls, 10 generations of humans had lived and died, all dreaming of the same thing, a new home among the stars. Now, as the ship approached the green and blue world of 442b, that dream was finally becoming real. Stood at the observation deck, watching the planet grow larger through the thick glass window. She was 42 years old, with short black hair and eyes that had seen too much violence back on Earth. As the ship's security chief, it was her job to protect the 2,000 souls aboard. She had trained her whole life for threats she understood. Pirates, criminals, desperate people doing desperate things, but nothing had prepared her for what appeared on the sensors that morning. Unknown vessels approaching, the computer announced in its calm, mechanical voice. Count 17, configuration unknown, origin unknown. Captain, a woman of 70 with silver hair and a face marked by wisdom and worry, called all senior officers to the bridge. Arrived to find already there, his fingers dancing nervously across his engineering console. He was her oldest friend, a brilliant man who understood machines better than people. Next to him stood the ship's language expert, her eyes bright with excitement rather than fear. First contact, whispered, as if saying it too loud might make it disappear. We're not alone, we were never alone. The alien ships surrounded the Dawn's Promise like wolves circling a wounded deer. They were beautiful in a terrifying way, all smooth curves and glowing lights, making the human vessel look like a rusted tin can in comparison. Then a message came through, translated roughly by the ship's computer into broken human language. Primitive vessel, you will stop. You will wait, we come to you. Captain looked at her officers. Suggestions. We should welcome them, said quickly. This is what humanity has dreamed about for centuries, meeting other intelligent life. Said nothing. Her hand rested on the pistol at her hip, an old weapon that had belonged to her grandfather. It was a simple thing, just metal and springs and bullets, but it had kept her family alive through the last Earth War. She had carried it across 200 light years as a reminder of where she came from. The aliens arrived within the hour. They called themselves and they were magnificent and horrible in equal measure. Each one stood 8 feet tall, their bodies covered in crystalline shells that shimmered like diamonds under the ship's lights. They moved with a grace that made humans look clumsy, and when they spoke, their voices created harmonies that seemed to vibrate in his chest. Their leader introduced himself as Commander. His crystal shell was darker than the others, almost purple, and his eyes were pools of liquid silver that showed no emotion at all. We are the Dominion, he announced to the gathered humans. We have ruled this region of space for 10,000 years. All species within our borders serve the Dominion. This is the natural order. This is how things are. Captain stepped forward with dignity. We are humans from Earth. We come in peace, seeking only a new home for our people. We wish to be friends, to trade, to learn from each other. Made a sound that might have been laughter. Friends? Trade? You misunderstand, primitive one. We do not make friends with lesser species. We collect them. Your kind will serve the Dominion as all others do. The tension in the room changed, felt it like electricity on her skin. She watched the alien guards, counting them, measuring distances, calculating angles. 6 guards, plasma weapons, energy shields glowing faintly around each one. Perhaps we should discuss terms, tried, her voice shaking slightly. Surely there is room for negotiation. There is no negotiation, cut her off. Show me your weapons. I wish to see what the primitives carry. Captain hesitated, but refusing seemed pointless. She nodded to who stepped forward with her pistol, brought a plasma cutter from engineering. Other crew members presented their simple tools of defense. Stun batons, chemical sprays, a few old rifles from the ship's emergency locker. Examined each item with growing amusement. When he picked up his pistol, he turned it over in his crystalline hands like a child examining a curious rock. "What is this?" he asked. "A tool for making noise." "It's a firearm," said quietly. "A weapon." A weapon, held it up for his guards to see. They made sounds of amusement, their harmonics rising and falling in what was clearly laughter. "This thing fires small pieces of metal, yes, propelled by chemical explosion." "Yes." "How wonderfully primitive." Tossed the pistol back to her casually. "Our shields stop energy attacks. They stop high-velocity projectiles. They stop everything that could possibly harm us. Your little metal thrower is a toy, a relic from a violent, backwards past." He walked among the humans, looking at them the way a farmer might look at cattle. "Your species has spirit, I can see that. You will make adequate workers. Perhaps in a few thousand years, once you have been properly civilized, we might even allow you limited self-governance." "And if we refuse?" Captain asked, her voice steady despite the fear knew she must feel. "Stopped walking. Refuse. No species refuses the dominion. Your ships cannot outrun ours. Your weapons cannot scratch our shields. You have no choice in this matter, primitive one. You never did." He moved toward the exit, his guards falling into formation around him. At the door, he paused and looked back at the pistol still in his hand. "Keep your toys," he said with amusement. "They will remind you of the violent creatures you once were, before the Dominion brought you peace." Then they were gone, returning to their ships, leaving the humans alone with their fear and their anger and their desperate hope. Captain dismissed everyone except her senior officers. In the quiet of the bridge, with stars burning cold outside the windows, she looked at each of them in turn. "Speak freely," she said. "What are our options?" "We could run," said without conviction. "Maybe find another system, another planet." "They would catch us," replied. "Their ships are faster, we saw that much." "We could fight," someone suggested. "With what?" another voice asked. "You heard them. Our weapons are useless against their shields." Listen to the debate without joining it. She was thinking about something it said. Their shields stop high-velocity projectiles. She remembered her grandfather's lessons about the old wars, about how soldiers had survived against impossible odds by finding the weakness in their enemy's armor. She looked down at the pistol in her hand. It was a simple weapon, old technology. The bullet left the barrel at maybe 900 meters per second, not fast by modern standards. Certainly not fast compared to the plasma bolts and rail-gun rounds that the probably considered high velocity. An idea began to form in her mind. It was crazy. It was probably wrong, but it was something. "Captain," she said, interrupting the hopeless debate, "I need access to the ship's sensor logs, everything we recorded about especially their shields." Raised an eyebrow. "You have an idea?" "Maybe," tucked the pistol back into its holster. "Or maybe I just want to understand exactly what we're dealing with." She left the bridge with following her. In the corridor, he grabbed her arm. "What are you thinking?" She looked at her oldest friend, the man who had grown up beside her in the lower decks, who had held her hand when her grandfather died, who trusted her more than anyone else in the universe. "I'm thinking," she said slowly, "that maybe our primitiveness isn't a weakness. Maybe it's exactly what we need." 3 days passed like a slow nightmare. The ship surrounded the Dawn's Promise, guiding it through space like prison guards escorting a condemned man. Somewhere ahead, a processing station waited. The colonists would be sorted, assigned, and shipped to whatever world needed their labor. Families would be separated. Children would be taken. Everything they had dreamed about for 200 years would end in chains. Had not slept since the first contact. She sat in the engineering bay surrounded by screens filled with data, equations, and sensor readings. Empty coffee cups covered every surface. Eyes were red from staring at numbers, but his fingers kept moving across the keyboard. "Tell me again," said, "everything you found about their shields." Rubbed his face and pulled up a holographic display. Plasma shields work by detecting incoming threats and creating a counterforce. The system is incredibly advanced. It can stop a laser beam, absorb plasma fire, and deflect anything moving faster than about 2,000 meters per second. 2,000 meters per second, repeated. That's their minimum detection threshold. Exactly. Anything below that speed is too slow for their system to recognize as a weapon. Think about it from their perspective. What kind of attack moves that slowly? A thrown rock? A swinging fist? In their 10,000 years of warfare, they've never encountered an enemy that didn't use energy weapons or high-velocity projectiles. Picked up her grandfather's pistol. She had cleaned it carefully the night before, checking every part, oiling every spring. And this fires at what speed? About 900 meters per second, well below their detection threshold. Shook his head. I've run the simulations 50 times. Theoretically, a bullet from that pistol would pass through their shields like they weren't even there. The shield wouldn't stop it. It wouldn't even see it. Theoretically, admitted. There's no way to know for certain without testing it, and testing it means shooting a. Set the pistol down carefully. How many bullets do we have? On the whole ship, maybe 300 rounds of various calibers, plus the old rifles, the shotguns from the emergency locker, the hunting bows in the recreation section. Laughed bitterly. A museum's worth of primitive weapons. It's enough. Enough for what? Stood up, frustration breaking through his exhaustion. Even if your theory is right, even if our bullets can hurt them, we're talking about 2,000 civilians against an empire that has conquered hundreds of worlds. They have warships. They have armies. They have technology we can't even understand. Grabbed his shoulders and forced him to look at her. Do you remember what my grandfather used to say about the last Earth War? He said a lot of things. He said that every empire falls the same way. They become so confident in their power that they forget how they got it. They stop training for real fights because they think they'll never have one. And then someone comes along who doesn't know they're supposed to lose, and everything changes. Stared at her. In his eyes she could see the fear of a man who had never held a weapon, never raised his fist in anger, never imagined he would have to fight for his life. But she could also see something else. Trust. He trusted her the way she had trusted her grandfather, completely and without question. What's the plan? He asked quietly. Spent the next 2 days gathering her team. Security chief was a lonely job on a colony ship. Most problems were solved with conversation, not confrontation. But she had 3 people trained for violence, 3 people who understood what might be coming. Was a quiet man who had been a competition shooter back on Earth. He could put a bullet through a coin at 500 meters. Was small and fierce, an explosives expert who had worked in mining before joining the colony mission. And was built like a wall, a close combat instructor who had taught half of what she knew. She gathered them in a storage room deep in the ship's belly, away from cameras and listening devices. In 2 days, we arrive at their processing station, she said. When we do, we're going to have one chance. One moment where they're not expecting anything. That's when we move. Move how? Asked. We've all seen those shields. Explains Discovery. She watched their faces change from confusion to doubt to something like hope. It was a thin hope, desperate and fragile, but it was real. You're saying our guns might actually work? Asked. I'm saying there's a chance, a real chance. Cracked his knuckles. What about hand-to-hand? If their shields don't stop slow-moving objects, what happens if I just walk up and punch one? Then you'd probably break your hand on their crystal shell, admitted. They're still armored. Our bullets might penetrate, but we need to hit vital areas, and we need to make every shot count. She laid out the plan. It was simple because complicated plans fell apart under pressure. Would find a high position with a clear line of sight. Would prepare charges to destroy communications equipment. Would protect the civilians and lead them to safety when the fighting started. And would take the first shot. Why you? Asked. Because someone has to prove the theory. If I'm wrong, if the bullet bounces off their shields like everything else, then at least you'll know to surrender. Maybe they'll be merciful. Maybe they'll just kill me and let the rest of you live. And if you're right, smiled grimly, then we show the galaxy what humans are capable of. The night before arrival, visited Captain in her quarters. The old woman was sitting by her window, looking out at the alien ships that surrounded them. "You've made your preparations," said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, Captain. You understand that what you're planning could get us all killed. Not just the fighters. Everyone. The children, the families, everyone." Sat down across from her. "I understand, but I also understand what happens if we don't fight. We become slaves. Our children become slaves. And their children, forever. They don't plan to educate us or elevate us. They want to use us until we're used up and then throw us away." Was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into her desk and pulled out a small photograph. It showed a young woman in military uniform, smiling at the camera. "My daughter," she said. "She died in the last Earth War fighting for a piece of land that doesn't exist anymore. I used to think she was foolish, that nothing was worth dying for, but now I understand. There are things worse than death. There are ways of living that are no different from being dead." She handed the photograph to. "Keep this with you tomorrow. Remember that you're fighting for the same thing she fought for, the right to choose our own future." Took the photograph with trembling hands. "Captain, I need to hear you say it. I need your permission." Stood up slowly, her old bones protesting the movement. She placed her hand on shoulder, and in that moment she wasn't a tired old woman anymore. She was a commander. "Show them what our ancestors survived," she said. "Show them what makes humans dangerous. And don't miss." The processing station appeared on the screens the next morning. It was massive, a floating city of metal and glass, orbiting a gas giant like a mechanical moon. Thousands of ships came and went from its docking bays. Millions of workers from dozens of species toiled within its walls, serving an empire that had crushed their spirits generations ago. Watched it grow larger through the observation deck window. Her grandfather's pistol was loaded, cleaned, and ready. Around her neck hung Captain's photograph. In her heart burned a flame that had kept humanity alive through ice ages and plagues and wars that had nearly ended the species. Found her there, staring at the station. "Are you scared?" he asked. "Terrified," she admitted. "But my grandfather told me something once. He said that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's deciding that something else is more important than fear." "What's more important?" Turned to face him. "Tomorrow, the chance that our children might live free, the possibility that we might be more than slaves." She grabbed his hand and squeezed it tight. "That's worth being scared for." The ship began its final approach. Inside, 2,000 humans waited for slavery. But 4 of them were waiting for something else entirely. The processing station smelled wrong. That was first thought as she stepped through the airlock with the other colonists. The air was too clean, too artificial, like breathing inside a hospital. The lights were too bright, hurting her eyes after the gentle glow of the dawn's promise. Everything about this place felt designed to make her feel small. 2,000 humans walked in a long line through gleaming corridors. Families held hands. Mothers carried sleeping children. Old men shuffled forward with heads bowed. The guards watched them pass with bored expressions, occasionally shoving someone who walked too slowly. Kept her eyes down, but she was counting everything. Guards, 47 visible. Weapons, plasma rifles, standard design. Security cameras, 12 in this corridor alone. Emergency doors, 3, all controlled by panels she couldn't reach. The odds were terrible, but odds didn't matter anymore. Walked somewhere behind her, disguised as just another colonist. She couldn't see him, but she knew he was finding his position, calculating angles, preparing for the shot that would follow hers. Was near the back of the line, her explosives hidden beneath her clothes in packages no larger than playing cards. stayed close to the children, ready to protect them when everything fell apart. The line moved forward into a massive circular chamber. The ceiling rose so high they couldn't see it, vanishing into darkness above the harsh lights. In the center of the chamber stood a raised platform, and on that platform waited Commander. He looked different today. His crystalline shell had been polished until it sparkled, and he wore some kind of ceremonial cloth draped across his shoulders. Behind him stood a row of officials, all watching the humans with expressions of mild curiosity, like scientists observing an interesting insect. "Welcome," his voice boomed through the chamber, amplified by technology couldn't see. "Welcome to your new life in service to the Dominion. For 10,000 years, our empire has brought order to chaos. We have taken primitive species and given them purpose. Today, we grant you that same gift." The humans stood in silence. Some were crying quietly, others stared at the ground already defeated, but here and there saw faces like her own, angry, watchful, waiting. "You will be sorted according to your abilities," continued. "The strong will labor, the intelligent will serve, the weak will be processed differently. This is not punishment, this is optimization. This is the Dominion's gift to lesser species." He paused, savoring the fear that filled the chamber. Then he raised one crystalline hand and gestured toward the humans. "Is there anyone who wishes to speak? Anyone who wishes to thank the Dominion for this opportunity?" Silence. Laughed, a harmonic sound that made teeth hurt. "No, how disappointing. I thought perhaps one of you might have found some wisdom since our last meeting. No matter, the processing will begin in." "I'll speak." Every head turned toward the voice. Stepped forward, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The guards around her tensed, but raised a hand to stop them. "Ah, the female with the primitive weapon, I remember you." His silver eyes studied her with amusement. "Speak then, little one. What wisdom do you wish to share?" Walked toward the platform, each step feeling like a mile. She could feel eyes on her from somewhere above. She could feel tension from the back of the crowd. She could feel positioning himself near the children. Everything depended on the next few seconds. She stopped 10 meters from and bowed her head respectfully. "I want to thank you," she said, keeping her voice humble. "Thank you for teaching us about the galaxy. Thank you for showing us how advanced civilizations operate. We have learned so much from the—" Nodded with satisfaction. "Good. Perhaps your species is not as stupid as I feared. But in return," continued, her voice changing, hardening, "I would like to teach you something about Earth, about humans, about what we are." "Teach me?" Sounded amused. "What could a primitive possibly teach the Dominion?" Raised her head and looked directly into his silver eyes. "I can teach you why you should have been afraid of us." Her hand moved. The pistol cleared the holster. The barrel came up. Time seemed to slow. She saw his expression shift from amusement to confusion. She saw the guards reaching for their weapons. She saw the shield around the commander flicker, waiting for a threat that met its parameters. The trigger squeezed, the hammer fell, the powder ignited. The bullet left the barrel at 900 meters per second. Too slow for advanced sensors. Too primitive for sophisticated shields. Just a small piece of metal moving through space, unchanged since humans first discovered gunpowder centuries ago. It passed through his shield without resistance. It punched through his crystalline chest like a fist through glass. Commander, conqueror of worlds, master of an empire that had ruled for 10,000 years, looked down at the hole in his body with an expression of pure disbelief. His harmonics went silent. His silver eyes dimmed. He fell. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. 3 seconds of complete, absolute silence. The guards stared at their fallen commander. The officials stared at the human female with the smoking weapon. The colonists stared at the impossible sight of an invincible alien lying dead on the floor. Then spoke into her hidden communicator. "Green light." The ceiling exploded with the crack of his rifle. 3 officers dropped in rapid succession, their shields as useless as his had been. Purple blood sprayed across the polished floor. At the back of the chambers, explosives detonated. The communications array vanished in a ball of fire. Security cameras shattered. Alarms began to scream. His voice rose above the chaos. "Everyone down, get down and stay down." The colonists dropped to the floor, covering their children, protecting their families. The guards finally recovered from their shock and opened fire. Plasma bolts scorched through the air, melting metal and burning flesh. 3 humans fell. 5, 7. But the guards were panicking, firing wildly, unable to process what was happening. Their shields were supposed to protect them. Their technology was supposed to be superior. How was this possible? How were the primitives killing them? Moved through the chaos like water through stone. Her pistol barked again and again. Each bullet found its target. Each target fell. She had 14 rounds. She couldn't miss. A guard charged toward her, his plasma rifle raised. She dropped to one knee, sighted down the barrel, and put a bullet through his eye. He crashed to the ground at her feet, his shield flickering and dying with him. Behind her had armed himself with a fallen guard's weapon. But instead of trying to fire it, he swung it like a club, smashing it into another guard's legs, bringing him down, then stomping on his throat. Primitive violence, brutal and effective. Appeared from somewhere, a knife in her hand, blood on her face. She had killed 2 guards before they even knew she was there, sliding her blade through the gaps in their crystal armor. "Comms are down," she reported. "They can't call for help." "How long until someone notices?" asked. "Minutes, maybe less." Looked around the chamber. Bodies lay everywhere and human alike. The colonists were starting to rise, their eyes wide with shock and fear and something else, something like hope. "Listen to me," shouted, her voice cutting through the screaming alarms. "We just proved that we can fight them. We just proved that we can win. But this is only the beginning. There are more guards coming. More. We need everyone who can hold a weapon to stand up now." For a moment, no one moved. Then a young man stepped forward. His name was remembered, a farmer's son who had never touched a weapon in his life. "Give me a gun," he said. Another stepped forward, and another, and another. Ran into the chamber, his arms full of weapons scavenged from the ship. Old rifles, hunting bows, kitchen knives, anything that could cut or shoot or stab. He passed them out with shaking hands, his face pale but determined. "I can access their systems from here," he said too. "If I can get to that terminal, I might be able to open the doors. There are other prisoners on this station, other species, thousands of them." Nodded. "Do it. Secure this room. Find another position and cover the entrances. How many explosives do you have left?" "Enough to make them regret building this place." The alarms continued to scream. Somewhere in the station, reinforcements were being assembled. They would come in force, furious and frightened and desperate to crush this impossible rebellion. But as loaded her last magazine into her grandfather's pistol, she smiled. They were no longer slaves. They were no longer primitives waiting to be processed. They were humans, and they had just taught the galaxy its first lesson. The battle for the processing chamber lasted 47 minutes. When it was over, 63 humans lay dead among the bodies of 112 guards. The floor was slick with blood of 2 colors, red and purple mixing together in pools that reflected the harsh overhead lights. Stood at the center of the carnage, reloading a plasma rifle she had taken from a fallen guard. Her own pistol was empty now, the last bullet spent on an officer who had tried to execute a group of children. The grandfather's weapon hung at her hip, lighter than it had ever been. "Station security is responding," reported from his position at the control terminal. His fingers flew across the alien interface, somehow making sense of symbols and systems that had never been designed for human eyes. 300 guards mobilizing from the eastern sector, another 200 from the north. "Can you seal the corridors?" asked. "Working on it." A pause. "Got it. Eastern corridor is locked down. That buys us maybe 20 minutes before they cut through." Limped toward her, his left leg wrapped in torn cloth that was already soaking through with blood. A blade had caught him during the close fighting, carving a deep wound that should have kept him down. But had kept fighting anyway, breaking necks and crushing skulls until there was no one left to kill. "The civilians are secure," he reported. "Lost 37, mostly older folks who couldn't move fast enough when the shooting started." His voice cracked slightly. "Some of them were my students back on the ship. I taught them how to exercise, how to stay healthy. I never taught them how to die." Put her hand on his shoulder. "They knew the risks. We all did." "Did we?" Looked around at the colonists who had survived. They huddled in groups, holding each other, crying, praying, trying to process what had just happened. "I don't think any of us really believed it would come to this." His voice was urgent. "You need to see this." She crossed to his terminal, stepping over bodies without looking down. The screen showed a map of the station, hundreds of rooms and corridors spreading out in every direction. Red dots marked positions. Blue dots marked the human colonists. But there were other dots, thousands of them, green and yellow and orange and white, other species, other prisoners, packed into holding cells throughout the station. "How many?" asked. 40,000, at least, from 12 different species." His voice was quiet. "Some of them have been here for generations, born into slavery, never knew anything else." Stared at the screen. 40,000 prisoners, 40,000 potential allies, 40,000 reasons why this fight was about more than just human survival. "Can you open their cells?" "Yes, but if I do, they will know we've accessed the central systems. They'll prioritize retaking this position." "They're already doing that. Open the cells." Hesitated for just a moment, then started typing. "Opening cells in sectors 7 through 15, broadcasting a message on all frequencies." The message went out in 100 languages, translated by the station's own systems. It said, "We are human. We are fighting. If you want freedom, fight with us." For a long moment, nothing happened. The green and yellow and orange dots remained where they were, frozen in their cells, uncertain if this was a trick or a trap or simply too good to be true. Then one dot moved, then another, then 100, then 1,000. Across the station, slaves who had never dared to raise their hands against their masters picked up tools and chains and anything else they could find. They poured out of their cells, decades of suppressed rage finally finding an outlet. Guards who had tormented them for years suddenly found themselves surrounded, overwhelmed, torn apart. "It's working," breathed. "They're actually fighting." But its attention was elsewhere. On the map, she could see a massive cluster of red dots moving toward the central communications hub. If they reached it, they could call for reinforcements. They could bring the entire Dominion fleet down on the station. "How many explosives do you have left?" Checked her pockets. 4 charges, enough to drop a building. "The communications hub. Can you reach it before they do?" Studied the map, calculating distances and routes. "Maybe, if I run." "Then run." Was gone before finished speaking, disappearing into a side corridor with her charges clutched against her chest. Moved to follow her, providing cover, but called him back. "No, I need you here. When those guards break through the sealed corridor, you'll be the only thing standing between them and these people." Nodded grimly and took up position facing the eastern doors. His rifle was nearly empty, but he had collected a dozen plasma pistols from fallen guards. He arranged them in a neat row beside him, ready to pick up each one as the others ran dry. The minutes crawled by. On the map, watched Dot racing through corridors, dodging patrols, climbing through ventilation shafts. The forces reached the communications hub first, but was right behind them. The explosion was visible from across the station, a pillar of fire that rose toward the ceiling and then mushroomed outward, consuming everything in its path. Secondary explosions followed as power lines overloaded and fuel cells detonated. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing left of the communications hub but a twisted skeleton of melted metal. Said into her communicator, "Report. Static. Do you copy?" More static, then faintly a cough. "I'm alive, barely, lost some hair and a few layers of skin, but I'm alive." A pause. "They can't call for help now. Whatever happens, we've got the station isolated." Relief flooded through, but there was no time to celebrate. The eastern doors were glowing red, the metal beginning to soften under cutting torches. The guards were almost through. "Everyone who can fight, form up behind," she ordered. "Everyone else, move to the western exit. Is there anywhere safe on the station?" "The cargo bays in the lower levels. They're designed for storage, not security. If we can get there, we might be able to hold out until." "Until what?" Didn't answer. Until what? Until they ran out of soldiers. Until help arrived from nowhere. Until they all died of exhaustion. The doors exploded inward. Started firing before the smoke cleared, his plasma pistol dropping the first 3 guards to enter. A farmer named stood beside him, firing an old hunting rifle that had crossed the stars to be here. A teenage girl named threw herself at a guard twice her size, driving a kitchen knife into his throat. Fought in the press of bodies, too close for guns, relying on fists and elbows and the brutal techniques her grandfather had taught her. Grabbed her arm and twisted. She heard something crack. The pain was incredible, but she kept fighting, smashing her forehead into the alien's face, feeling crystal shatter under the impact. The battle became a blur. Time lost meaning. There was only the next enemy, the next moment of survival, the next breath that might be her last. And then, impossibly, it was over. The corridor was filled with bodies, more than human but far too many human. Was down, a plasma burn across his chest, breathing shallow. The farmer was dead, still clutching his rifle. The teenager sat against a wall, her hands shaking, her eyes empty. But the guards had stopped coming. Staggered to terminal, her broken arm hanging uselessly at her side. What happened? Where are the rest of them? Pointed to the map. Across the station, the red dots were in full retreat. They were falling back toward the docking bays, toward their ships, toward escape. "They're running," said, disbelief in his voice. "The other prisoners, they're everywhere. The guards can't control them anymore. The whole station is in open revolt." Watched the red dots flee, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she allowed herself to feel something like hope. But in the back of her mind, she knew this was only the beginning. The guards on this station were a tiny fraction of the Dominion's forces. When word got out about what happened here, when the Empire learned that their shields were useless against human weapons, they would respond with overwhelming force. She said quietly, "Before we destroyed their communications, did any message get out?" He checked his logs and his face went pale. One message, short burst, heavily compressed. It transmitted just before its charges went off. What did it say? Translated the symbols slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "The primitives, their weapons, they work, they work." Closed her eyes. Somewhere out there in the vast darkness of space, the Dominion was already preparing its response. The real war was about to begin. The Dominion fleet arrived on the 7th day. Stood on the observation deck of the captured station, watching 300 warships emerge from faster-than-light travel. They filled the sky like a swarm of metal locusts, each one large enough to glass a planet, each one carrying enough firepower to reduce the station to atoms. Behind her, the survivors had gathered. 2,000 humans were now joined by 37,000 freed slaves from 12 different species. They had spent the past week preparing for this moment, knowing it was coming, knowing they would probably die when it arrived. Had worked miracles with the station's defenses. He had modified the Ancient to fire at what they would consider primitive velocities. He had loaded the missile tubes with fragmentation warheads, the same basic design humans had used in their wars against each other. He had turned every advantage the station had into something the Dominion shields couldn't stop. But 300 warships was 300 warships. "They're hailing us," reported from the communication station. The linguist had become their voice to the galaxy, translating everything, learning new languages in hours, building bridges between species that had never spoken to each other before. "Admiral demands our immediate surrender." "Put him through," said. A hologram materialized in front of her, showing an even larger than had been. His crystal shell was pure white, almost blinding, and his silver eyes burned with cold fury. "You are the human who killed Commander," said. It wasn't a question. "I am. You have caused much trouble, Primitive. Your species has embarrassed the Dominion in ways that cannot be tolerated. The High Council has decided that humanity is too dangerous to be enslaved. You will be exterminated instead. Every human on this station, every human on your colony ship, every human everywhere, until your species exists only in history books." Felt the fear of those words ripple through the crowd behind her. Children whimpered. Adults held their breath. The 37,000 freed slaves shifted nervously, wondering if they had traded one death for another. But had faced death before. She had looked into its eyes and refused to blink. "Admiral," she said calmly, "you have 300 ships. We have one station, fewer than 40,000 people, and a handful of weapons your civilization considers primitive. By any reasonable calculation, you should win." Should leaned forward. "Do you think there is any outcome here other than your complete destruction?" "I think you're afraid," smiled, and there was no warmth in it. "I think you've never faced an enemy your shields couldn't stop. I think in 10,000 years of conquest, you've forgotten what it feels like to be vulnerable. And I think when those missiles start flying through your defenses like they aren't even there, you're going to realize that all your advanced technology is worthless against a species that spent its entire history learning how to kill." His harmonics shifted to something harsh and grating. Anger had learned. Real, genuine anger. "Your weapons are toys. Your species is nothing. You will die screaming, Primitive, and the galaxy will forget you ever existed." "Maybe," said, "but we'll take a lot of you with us. And every species in this sector is watching. Every slave, every prisoner, every conquered world is going to see what happens here today. They're going to see that the Dominion can bleed. And that knowledge will spread, Admiral. You can kill us, but you can't kill what we've started." She ended the transmission before could respond. The attack began minutes later. The Dominion fleet opened fire with plasma cannons and energy lances, filling space with brilliant destruction. The station's shields held, absorbing the assault, but knew they couldn't last forever. "Return fire," she ordered. The station spoke. Modified to fire at 900 meters per second, their rounds were invisible to Dominion targeting systems, insignificant to Dominion shields. The first volley punched through the lead dreadnought's hull like paper. Explosions blossomed in the darkness as atmosphere vented and power cores failed. "Direct hit," reported, his voice cracking with disbelief. "She's breaking up." Another volley. Another dreadnought fell, then a cruiser, then a destroyer. The Dominion fleet scattered in confusion, their formation breaking as captains realized their shields were useless. Some tried to close the distance, thinking they could overwhelm the station with numbers. They died faster than the others. But for every ship that fell, 10 more kept firing. The station's shields buckled under the constant assault. Warning lights flashed everywhere. Hull breaches opened in the outer sections, sucking screaming people into the void. "We're losing structural integrity," reported. "Shields at 30% and falling." Watched the battle unfold, calculating odds that grew worse with every second. They had hurt the Dominion, hurt them badly, but it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. His voice came through her communicator. The big man was in the shuttle bay leading the last group of fighters. "I've got an idea, a bad one." "Tell me." "Their flagship, command ship. If we can take it out, their fleet loses coordination. Maybe buys enough time for the others to escape." "How do you plan to take out a command ship?" "I don't plan to take it out. I plan to fly into it." Closed her eyes. She had known this moment would come. She had known since the beginning that some of them wouldn't survive. But hearing volunteer to die still felt like a knife in her heart. "The shuttle bay is full of people," she said. "I already evacuated them. It's just me and a shuttle packed with the last of explosives." His voice was calm, almost peaceful. "This is the only way, you know that." She did know. She hated knowing it, but she knew. Don't make this harder than it has to be." A pause. "It's been an honor. Tell the others. Tell them to keep fighting. Tell them humans don't surrender." The communication cut off. Seconds later, a small shuttle rocketed out of the station's bay, weaving between plasma bolts, heading straight for the flagship. Ship tried to target it, but the shuttle was too small, too fast, too unpredictable. Defensive fire splashed around it without connecting. The shuttle grew closer, impossibly close. And then it disappeared into the flagship's docking bay. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the flagship exploded. The detonation was massive, consuming not just ship but 4 cruisers that had been flying in close formation. The shockwave rippled through space, throwing smaller vessels off course, disrupting targeting systems, creating chaos where there had been order. Watched the flagship die, and something inside her died with it. Had been her friend, her comrade, her brother in all the ways that mattered. Now he was gone, his atoms scattered among the stars, his sacrifice buying them precious minutes of survival. "All ships, this is Acting Admiral," a new voice crackled over the Dominion communications. "Admiral is dead. All units fall back to defensive positions. Fall back." The Dominion fleet began to retreat, not in the organized withdrawal of a tactical repositioning, but in the panicked flight of soldiers who had just watched their invincible commander die. Appeared at side, his face wet with tears. "They're running. The message. The broadcast we sent to the other systems. There are reports of uprisings everywhere. The slaves are fighting back. The whole empire is coming apart." Nodded slowly. She should have felt triumph. They had won. Against impossible odds, against the greatest military power in the galaxy, they had won. But all she could see was face, and still recovering from his wounds, and by her own explosives, and the hundreds of humans and thousands of freed slaves who had died to make this victory possible. "It's not over," she said finally. "This is just the beginning. The Dominion won't give up after one defeat. They'll regroup, adapt, come back stronger. We need to be ready." "We will be," had joined them, her translator device still active, a dozen alien languages flowing through it. "The species we freed. They want to fight with us. They want to learn our weapons, our tactics, our way of war. They're calling it the Human Alliance." The Human Alliance. It sounded strange. Humans leading other species. Humans teaching others how to fight. Humans becoming the warriors of the galaxy. But maybe that was fitting. Maybe that was what humanity had always been meant to be. Not conquerors or slaves, but teachers. Showing the universe that freedom was worth fighting for, worth dying for, worth any price. Pulled out her grandfather's pistol, empty now, useless. But she held it like a sacred object, like a symbol of everything that had brought them to this moment. "My grandfather told me something once," she said, her voice carrying across the observation deck. "He said that the measure of a species isn't how they live in times of peace. It's how they fight in times of war. The thought we were primitive because we killed each other. But that's exactly why we survived. We were forged in fire, generation after generation, until fighting became part of our blood." She looked out at the stars, at the retreating fleet, at the vast galaxy that suddenly seemed a little less terrifying than it had a week ago. They asked what makes humans dangerous. It's not our weapons. It's not our technology. It's that we've never learned how to surrender. And now, the whole galaxy is going to learn that lesson with us. Behind her, the survivors began to cheer. Human voices mixed with alien harmonics, creating a sound that had never existed before in the history of the universe. The sound of hope. The sound of freedom. The sound of humanity, finally taking its place among the stars. Captain's voice played over the station's speakers, a recording made before her death in the battle. We came to the stars hopping to find friends. We found tyrants instead, so we did what humans have always done. We fought, and we won. Let the galaxy remember, humanity asks for peace, but we are very, very good at war. Holstered her grandfather's pistol and turned to face her people. There was work to do.